Hey everyone, Claire Sterling here. Mayor Mamdani has been in office for less than 90 days. In that time, BlackRock has confirmed a permanent second headquarters in Texas. The largest asset manager on earth is quietly, methodically, building a life outside of New York. And the mayor is still talking about raising taxes. I want you to sit with that sequence for a moment. Not the politics of it, not the ideology of it, just the raw timeline. 90 days. One new mayor, one historic corporate signal, and a city that does not yet seem to understand what is actually happening to it. By the time we reach the end of this video, you will understand it completely. And the final number I am going to give you, a number that connects BlackRock's Texas expansion to New York's fiscal future in a way that nobody in the mainstream press has laid out clearly. That number is going to change how you see this story permanently. Stay with me. Let me start with BlackRock, because I think most people, even people who follow financial news closely, do not fully grasp what BlackRock actually is. And until you grasp it, you cannot understand why this story matters as much as it does. BlackRock is the largest asset management firm in the history of the world. It manages approximately $10 trillion in assets. 10 trillion. I want to help you feel that number because when we hear figures of that magnitude, our minds tend to go numb. The abstraction becomes a shield against comprehension. So let me break it down. The entire GDP of the United States, every dollar of economic output generated by the most powerful economy on Earth in a single year, is approximately $25 trillion. BlackRock manages 10 trillion. That means this single firm controls an amount of capital equivalent to 40% of America's entire annual economic output. If BlackRock were a country, it would be the third largest economy on Earth, behind only the United States and China, ahead of Japan, ahead of Germany, ahead of every other nation on the planet. That is what is building a second headquarters in Texas. And here is what makes this different from every other corporate departure story I have covered on this channel. When Tesla left California, it was one company, driven in significant part by one founder's personality and public feuds with state officials. When Citadel left Chicago, it was one hedge fund, driven by Ken Griffin's very specific and very personal frustration with the city's governance. Those departures were real and consequential. But they could be, and were, partially explained away as the decisions of idiosyncratic individuals. BlackRock is not idiosyncratic. BlackRock is institutional. BlackRock is the establishment. BlackRock is the firm that manages the retirement savings of teachers and nurses and firefighters across the country through its iShares ETF platform. BlackRock is the firm that governments call when they need someone to manage a financial crisis. The Federal Reserve called BlackRock during the 2020 market collapse to help manage its emergency bond buying program. That is how central, how systemically important, how deeply embedded in the architecture of the global financial system this firm is. When a firm like that starts building infrastructure outside of New York, it is not making an eccentric personal decision. It is making a calculated institutional judgment. It is saying, with the full weight of its analytical resources and its fiduciary responsibility to its clients, that the long-term risk profile of concentrating its operations in New York has become unacceptable. And that judgment, coming from an institution of BlackRock's caliber, is one of the most significant signals the financial world has produced in years. Now let me tell you about Larry Fink. Because to understand BlackRock's Texas move, you need to understand the man who built it. And the distance between what Larry Fink has said publicly about New York and what BlackRock is doing operationally is a story in itself. Larry Fink founded BlackRock in 1988 with 7 partners and a single room in a Manhattan office building. He built the firm in New York. He raised his family in New York. He has been one of the most prominent voices in American finance for 3 decades, and for most of that time, his name has been inseparable from the city's financial identity. He is not Ken Griffin, who is always somewhat adversarial toward the political class. Fink is a Democrat. He has been comfortable in progressive circles. He has spoken about the importance of stakeholder capitalism, of corporations taking responsibility for their social impact, of the role of business in addressing inequality. And yet, BlackRock is building in Texas. That gap between Fink's public positioning and BlackRock's operational decisions tells you something important. It tells you that even the executives who are most ideologically sympathetic to the political direction that New York is taking cannot make the math work. That even the people who believe in the principles behind the policies cannot, in good conscience, expose their firm and their clients to the fiscal and regulatory risks that those policies create. When the believers start hedging their bets, you know the situation is serious. Here is where it gets dangerous. BlackRock's Texas expansion is not happening in isolation. It is happening as part of a pattern that, when you step back far enough to see its full shape, looks less like a series of individual corporate decisions and more like a coordinated realignment of American financial power. Let me walk you through the timeline, because the sequence matters. Citadel moves to Miami in June 2022. Ken Griffin invests over $1 billion in Miami real estate and begins construction on a $2.5 billion permanent headquarters tower. Simultaneously, Citadel backs the creation of the Texas Stock Exchange, which receives federal regulatory approval and is set to launch in 2026. Goldman Sachs, one of the most storied names in American finance, has been quietly expanding its Dallas and Salt Lake City operations while reducing its Manhattan footprint. Charles Schwab relocates from San Francisco to Texas. And now BlackRock, the largest asset manager in human history, confirms a permanent second headquarters in the Lone Star State. This is not a coincidence. This is not a trend. This is a structural shift. And the difference between a trend and a structural shift is the difference between something that reverses when conditions change and something that becomes the new baseline regardless of what conditions do. What is happening to American financial geography right now is structural. The infrastructure is being built. The talent is moving. The networks are forming. And once a financial ecosystem reaches a certain critical mass in a new location, it becomes self-sustaining. It starts to generate its own gravity, its own deal flow, its own talent concentration, its own reasons for the next firm to come. Miami is already there. The financial community on Brickell Avenue has reached a density and a sophistication that would have seemed impossible 10 years ago. Texas is getting there. And New York, for the first time in a century, is on the wrong side of that momentum. Now here is something that almost nobody is talking about. And I think it might be the most important thing in this entire video. BlackRock does not just manage money. BlackRock builds the infrastructure through which money flows. Its Aladdin platform, the risk management and portfolio operating system that BlackRock developed internally and now licenses to other institutions, manages the risk calculations for approximately $21 trillion in assets globally. Not just BlackRock's $10 trillion, $21 trillion. Aladdin is used by pension funds, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds, and other asset managers around the world as the underlying operating system for their investment decisions. When BlackRock builds infrastructure in Texas, it is not just moving office space. It is potentially moving the technical and operational backbone of a system that touches $21 trillion in global capital. That is not a real estate decision. That is not a tax optimization decision. That is a decision about where the central nervous system of global finance is going to be located in 20 years. And right now, that decision is pointing south and west, away from New York. Let me talk about what Mayor Mamdani is doing while all of this is unfolding, because the contrast is almost too stark to be believed. Mamdani took office on January 1st, 2026. In his first 90 days, he has proposed a 2% tax surcharge on New York City residents earning more than $1 million per year. He has threatened a 9.5% across-the-board property tax increase if the state does not approve his millionaire surcharge. He has unveiled a record $127 billion spending plan that carries a still significant $7 billion deficit. And he has framed every one of these proposals in the language of justice, of redistribution, of making the wealthy pay their fair share. I want to be precise here, because this is not a simple story about a bad mayor making bad decisions. Mandonni is not stupid. He is not ignorant of the data. He inherited a genuine fiscal crisis. The $12 billion budget gap left by the previous administration was real. The inequality in New York City is real. The housing crisis is real. The pressure on working-class New Yorkers is real. The problems he is trying to solve are real problems. But here is the fatal flaw in his approach. And it is the same fatal flaw that has produced the same outcome in every city that has tried the same strategy. You cannot solve a problem caused by capital flight with policies that accelerate capital flight. The math does not work. It has never worked. And the reason it has never worked is not ideological. It is mechanical. It is the same reason you cannot fill a bathtub by opening the drain wider. The instrument you are using to solve the problem is the problem. New York City's top 1% of earners generate approximately 50% of the city's total income tax revenue. 50% from 1%. That is an extraordinary and extraordinarily fragile concentration of fiscal dependency. It means that the city's ability to fund everything, schools, hospitals, police, sanitation, infrastructure, social services, depends on a relatively small number of very mobile, very high-earning people choosing to remain within its borders. And those people are running the same calculation that BlackRock's board ran when it approved the Texas expansion. They are looking at what New York costs them and what New York gives them in return. And increasingly, the return is not justifying the cost. Not because New York has nothing to offer, but because the alternatives have become so much more compelling. Florida has zero state income tax. Texas has zero state income tax. And both of them, a decade ago, lacked the cultural and professional infrastructure to compete with New York for serious financial talent. That is no longer true. Miami has a Citadel Tower going up. Texas has a new stock exchange. Dallas is actively recruiting Manhattan firms with official city delegations. The gap between what New York offers and what the alternatives offer has narrowed dramatically. And Mamdani's proposals are narrowing it further every week. Let me tell you about a man I will call Robert. Robert is a partner at a mid-sized asset management firm in Midtown Manhattan. He manages approximately $4 billion in client assets. He earns, in a good year, somewhere between $3 and $5 million. He has lived in New York for 22 years. His children were born here. His professional network is here. His entire adult life has been built in this city. 3 months ago, Robert would have told you he was never leaving. New York was not just where he worked. It was who he was. The energy, the density, the sense that everything important was happening within walking distance. That was not something you gave up for a tax break. That was not something you traded away for a bigger house in a sunnier city. Last month, Robert opened a conversation with a real estate agent in Palm Beach. Not because he has made a decision, but because he wanted to understand what his options actually looked like. Because for the first time in 22 years, he found himself doing the math. Seriously. Not as an intellectual exercise, as a genuine life calculation. And the math, when he ran it honestly, was not close. Under Mamdani's proposed surcharge, Robert's combined tax rate would approach 55%. In Florida, that same income would be taxed at the federal rate only. The difference every single year is more than $500,000. $500,000 that currently goes to a government whose fiscal trajectory Robert does not find reassuring. $500,000 that, in Florida, would stay in his family's hands. Robert has not moved yet, but he is thinking about it for the first time. And that thought, once it takes root, has a way of growing. I have spoken to enough people in Robert's position to know how the story usually ends. It ends with a moving truck. Not immediately, but eventually. And when Robert goes, everything goes with him. His firm's lease, his employees' jobs, his charitable giving, his spending, his children's school tuition, his presence in the social and professional networks that keep New York's financial ecosystem functioning. One Robert is a rounding error. 1,000 Roberts is a fiscal crisis. And here is the number I promised you. The number that connects BlackRock's Texas expansion to New York's fiscal future in a way that reframes this entire story. BlackRock manages $10 trillion in assets. Its New York operations generate an enormous volume of taxable economic activity. payroll taxes on thousands of highly compensated employees, corporate taxes on a profitable firm, property taxes on premium Manhattan office space, the spending of those employees in New York's restaurants, shops, hotels, and service businesses, the charitable giving of those employees to New York's cultural institutions. Nobody has published a precise figure for the total annual economic contribution of BlackRock's New York presence to the city's fiscal health. But based on the calculations that have been done for comparable financial institutions, a reasonable estimate puts that contribution somewhere between $2 and $4 billion per year when you account for the full multiplier effect. $2 to $4 billion annually from one firm. New York City's total budget gap right now is approximately $7 billion. BlackRock's full departure, if it ever came to that, would not close that gap by itself, but it would widen it significantly. And BlackRock is not the only firm making calculations right now. Every financial institution in Manhattan is watching what BlackRock does. Every CFO is running the same numbers. Every board is having the same conversations. The doom loop does not require every firm to leave. It only requires enough of them to leave that the tax base shrinks faster than the city can cut its costs. And right now, the direction of travel is not encouraging. Chicago lost Citadel, then Caterpillar, then Boeing. Each departure made the next one easier. Each one sent a signal to the next firm in line that leaving was survivable, that the world did not end, that the sun still rose in the morning and the deals still got done and the talent followed where the opportunity went. BlackRock building in Texas is that signal for New York. It is the firm that every other firm watches, the institutional bellwether of American finance, saying quietly and with the full weight of $10 trillion behind it that New York is no longer the only answer. I am not here to tell you that New York is over. New York has come back before. It has assets and advantages that are real and that matter. The cultural gravity, the talent concentration, the network effects built over a century, those things do not disappear overnight. And there are scenarios in which New York's political leadership recognizes the signals it is receiving and responds with the kind of genuine, painful, politically costly reform that produced the recovery of the late 1970s and 1980s. But here is what I know. The 1975 recovery happened because the people in charge of New York were willing to tell the truth about what had gone wrong. They were willing to make hard choices that cost them politically. They were willing to change the signal the city was sending to the businesses and residents it needed to keep. And it worked. Not immediately, not painlessly, but it worked. What I am not seeing from City Hall right now is that willingness. What I am seeing instead is a mayor who ran on a platform of doing the opposite of what the 1975 recovery required. More spending, more taxes, more redistribution. The exact combination that, historically, tightens the doom loop rather than interrupting it. And BlackRock is watching. From its new offices in Texas, from the construction sites and the lease negotiations and the talent recruitments that are quietly, methodically, permanently shifting the center of gravity of American finance away from the island of Manhattan. The largest asset manager in the history of the world is building a life outside of New York. It is not doing so loudly. It is not issuing press releases designed to embarrass the mayor. It is not tweeting about tax rates. It is just building, quietly, permanently, the way institutions of that caliber always make their most consequential decisions. Not with drama, with architecture. And somewhere in City Hall, I hope someone is looking at those blueprints and understanding what they actually mean. Because $10 trillion does not move without a reason. And the reason it is moving right now has a very specific name. And that name is not BlackRock. That name is not Texas. That name is not even Mamdani. That name is mathematics. And mathematics does not negotiate. It does not respond to press conferences or campaign slogans or promises of a more just and equal city. It just runs the numbers, over and over, until the numbers make the decision for everyone. New York still has time. But the blueprints are already drawn, and the foundation in Texas is already being poured. I'm Claire Sterling. I'll see you in the next one.